Hey Monster Hunters, if you're enjoying Beast and Bible, please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, and don't forget to share it with somebody who might like it. Now, on to the show.
So you want me to tell you the story of my life?
Like I said, that's what I do. I interview people. I'm a collector of lives. FM radio, KFRC.
You'd have to have a lot of tape for my story.
Oh, that's no problem. I got a bag full of tape right here.
You followed me here, didn't you?
Yeah, I suppose I did. You seem very interesting. This is where you live?
No, it's just a room.
Oh, what do you say we get started? So, what do you do?
I'm a vampire.
That's something I haven't heard before. You mean this literally, I take it?
Absolutely.
That's a scene from the 1994 movie Interview with a Vampire, based on the novel by Anne Rice. In this clip, a news reporter finds himself interviewing a strange but well-dressed man claiming to be a vampire. Sensing that the journalist doesn't quite believe him, the vampire offers to turn on the light before moving at invisible speed across the room to turn it on.
I thought vampires didn't like the light.
We love it. I only wanted to prepare you. Don't be frightened.
Now, realizing he is in the presence of a person of significance and public interest, the journalist settles in for the interview of his life. Initially, I was going to have episode 6 be the start of guests and interviews, but the content we have was too good to wait. And while I'm not interviewing a vampire today, I do have the privilege of interviewing someone who surprised me by being willing to share their valuable time and expertise on this podcast. Our guest today is the creator of monster theory and a renowned expert in the fields of humanities and interdisciplinary studies. In this first half of the interview, we go over some history and context of Dr. Cohen's work before looking at more religious applications in part 2. I cannot wait to share Dr. Cohen's wisdom with you. I'm calling this episode Interview with a Scholar. I'm Dr. Seth Pierce, and welcome to Beast and Bible. Today I'm joined by Dr. Jeffrey Cohen, Dean of Humanities at Arizona State University and former co-president of the Association for the Study of Literature and the Environment, the largest professional organization in the environmental humanities. Dr. Cohen, thank you so much for being my guest today.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
So I was looking at your website, jeffreyjeromecohen.com, and it says that your research examines the strange and beautiful things that challenge the imagination, phenomena that are alien and intimate at once. Can you unpack that a little bit more for us and tell us what that looks like?
Yeah, sure. So what I was trying to capture in a few words is the way in which a lot of the things that obsess me are kind of a push-pull at once. Fear and desire, beauty and ugliness, and in their intimacy to each other. I guess in the end, a lot of my scholarly career is puzzling over things that are hard to make sense of, but still attract us and that we sit with for a long time.
Very cool. So that brings us to the subject of monsters. I teach a monsters, faith, and pop culture class at my college, and we've used your material on monster theory, that we go through the 7 theses, and I know the book has been out for a while. It came out in 1996, I believe, and has been sort of an industry standard for any sort of monster culture studies across different disciplines. So just in your own words, of course, outside of the book, what is monster theory?
First, I'm going to point out that that book came out in 1996, and that just blows me away because the book is older than my oldest son, and my oldest son is 25. So, how did I write a book that long ago, and who did that, and why is it still around? I want to say from the start that book was a collaborative effort. I don't take credit for it as being a single thing that I did in the world. Monster theory itself was an attempt to bring together some people that I knew that were interested in thinking through what monsters mean and the ways in which they have important things to say around contemporary academic and cultural discourses. So monster theory is an approach to understanding the world we inhabit And at the time that it was written, there was a real, I don't want to say squeamishness, but a reluctance to deal with the topic of monsters. It was thought to be unseemly, unacademic, not something that serious people study, despite the fact that they are a cultural preoccupation. So monster theory is an attempt to take seriously something that seemed to have been below serious regard previously.
Yeah. So, kind of taking a running start at it, before the book or the project came to mind, I mean, how did you decide to focus on monsters? Did you grow up loving monsters? How did you decide to create this? And what was the process as you were developing it? What was that like?
So, because I grew up in the olden days, we had television. We did not have internet, and you had to watch your favorite shows at your favorite times, and you had to show up for them. And so, the show that I always showed up for was on a weird set of stations called UHF, where the weird things were. UHF was all these numbers that were in the double digits. So on Channel 56 in Boston was always the creature double feature every Saturday afternoon. And I showed up for both of those. They were classic monster movies and sometimes little known monster movies that were just really fun to watch. I was completely engrossed. They were a window to a world that invited me to think about how this world could be configured differently. They opened up all kinds of possibilities of the imagination. They resonated with kind of literature that I like to read. And they set me on a path that eventually had me writing a dissertation on monsters as part of my doctoral work. And even getting that through a committee was not an easy lift. I had to work with people that honestly, I had to work with one person who was a sympathetic soul but didn't care that much about it because it was monsters. And the other was kind of tuned out and just willing to sign off on the project before I even began it. And then off he went. So I got to write this, what seemed to me an incredibly solitary project, but engross myself in research on, for me, because I trained as a medievalist, medieval monsters. And that had really called to me ever since I'd read Beowulf. I got fascinated in the time period and got fascinated in the ways in which monsters speak across time, keep reappearing in familiar forms. Facts like, there seems to be a dragon in almost every culture. So it gave a vocabulary for bringing together what often got separated into different time periods, different disciplines, and different walls that didn't have to be there. The monster smashes down disciplinary walls in a way that's really great.
Yeah. So coming out of medieval studies, Beowulf, were there any other factors, having been through that process myself, when you're looking for some sort of framework, even if you're creating, a new theory, you need, something to stand on. So medieval studies, Beowulf, monster theory hadn't been invented yet. Were there any other similar theories, ideas that you kind of used to stand on to put forth your dissertation?
Yes. So I did my dissertation at a fairly conservative university where people who did theory were different from people who did philology or archival work. So you weren't allowed to cross that boundary. But I, of course, found some of the most exciting work that was going on. All the kinds of theories that were addressed at unpacking identities that we'd come to believe were stable when they're not. They're culturally constructed, they change over time, and opening things up. I think all of that was in the air. Monster theory became a nexus for a convergence of all these theoretical discourses, not only in English, but in multiple languages. The discipline of complet was really important to me then. And again, staging a dialogue among many people working in many different kinds of work. So true babble, a conversation where the monster could come up, where differences met with each other.
Sure. So I was always told, like, when you're writing your dissertation, this is not your magnum opus. Just, the best dissertation is a done dissertation, kind of an idea. So how long after you wrote your dissertation did you jump into monster theory, or was that kind of a natural spin-off from the dissertation?
No, I actually have to agree. The best dissertation is a done dissertation. So I did mine. And again, days before the internet was much, I actually had an email address by the time I was in graduate school, but my advisors didn't. One was leaving for 6 months in Germany, the other for a year in Italy. So they signed off on the dissertation before it was done. I had carte blanche, just finished it, passed it in. There were no defenses at the university I was at, so got my degree. graduated to no job, sat around thinking, oh my gosh, I got to eat. I had a partial appointment at the institution I was in, and then I had another adjunct appointment at Tufts University. And during that time, I decided, because my dissertation writing had been fairly lonely, I didn't feel like I had a community around the project. That's when I tried to build it by finding people outside of medieval studies who would be interlocutors. And that's how the idea for Monster Theory got born. I taught a course at Tufts, has an experimental college where you can propose whatever crazy course you want. You don't have to be a faculty member there, and they'll let you be a lecturer for that one course. So I proposed it as a course. It came together really well, and that actually became the book as I became preoccupied with this. Eventually, it became a collection of essays. Proposed it to University of Minnesota Press, really pushed hard at that. And they put it under contract. So suddenly the book came into existence.
Yeah. So besides the age of the book, how long it's been, what has surprised you about Monster Theory?
It surprises me that it's still around and that people are using it. It surprises me that it's found its way especially into composition courses. So I often get contacted by email or on Twitter by people who are just entering college, and they've used Monster Theory and been invited to do a cultural analysis using it. And they write to me with such excitement, and I love it. I say it makes me so happy that it still has a life of its own, and especially that it's spurring people to imagine things that were even better than anything I put into the particular essay. Because it's always monster culture, 7 theses that gets excerpted from it. And I don't know if it helps any student to be more passionate about being in college, or licenses them to use their imagination and apply it to whatever materials preoccupy them. It feels like a huge win.
Yeah, absolutely. So, looking at your process, going through what you described with your dissertation, and then proposing this sort of course, and maybe at the time not everybody understanding what you're doing, what sort of advice would you give to whether they're in college, university, or high school, or maybe just a kid who's listening who's trying to write their first story or book or whatever? What sort of advice would you have as they are maybe trying to develop a project, not even necessarily a writing project, I guess. It could be a lot of different things, but something that people don't understand, but they are passionate about it. Any sort of advice, sage wisdom you would give to them?
Yes, Seth, thanks for asking that question. It's a really generous one because it's really a question of how do you live your life, right? You're going to live your life in conformity to maximizing your chances to, I don't know, have a stable job, a stable income, a stable future. I think most people should do that because it will make them happy. But then there is a fair number of people for whom that actually is not what they want, or is in fact a recipe for misery. So for me, when I published the book, I finally had a job. But when I even got it under contract, I had no job. My adjunct job was ticking out at the 3-year mark, and it was about to come to its end. And I kind of wrote a letter to the future that I wanted for myself and for others who might be thinking along these lines. Sent it not knowing if it would ever reach a destination. I think it's really cool that it did resonate and that it had its readers and that it opened up something for me. But I also admit that things could have gone badly wrong. And there are lots of talented people out there who've done incredibly creative things and become lost to history. Their books didn't make it. They didn't find the collaborator, or they didn't find the supporter. I personally, and it's easy for me to say this because I've had success, but I feel like that risk is well worth it. And I don't know. It's hard for me to tell someone trade a life of being passionate and taking risks and trying things out for trade a life for safety and maximize your chance for stability. Uh, uh, you have to be eyes wide open about consequences. I have no doubt about that. But I think in an alternative universe, or in the multiverse, there are many versions of me who never got academic jobs, and they're doing something else, and they're actually probably pretty happy doing that something else, and they're putting their imagination to other things, and that's fine.
Yeah.
That's actually fine.
No, that's good. So you mentioned the biggest thing, and I know this is kind of what I've done with the book. The seven theses tend to be what a lot of people go to, and there's a lot more in the book and monster studies in general to that, but it's just sort of a nice starting place. So of all the seven theses, which do you feel is the least understood or most underrated?
That's like saying, who's your favorite child
Right.
and who's the child that you're not, that doesn't get a break?
Yeah.
I just say it's probably the one, fear of the monster is really a form of desire. That statement, I almost couldn't believe it when I wrote that down because and this goes back to what you asked me earlier about what's in my bio. It kind of crystallized the complexity of the monster and helped me to articulate that the reason the monster is the perennial fascinator is, in fact, all we humans have are strong emotions. And we label them. Sometimes they're love, sometimes they're hate, sometimes they're fear, sometimes they're lust. But they're all a continuum of strong emotions that attach and detach. And that fear desire, because I think it's one thing, is what binds us to the monster. We're horrified by it. We run away, but we keep looking back. And there's something about what it does that connects us to it. It breaks every rule, but then again, maybe there's lots of rules that need to be broken. It's a give and a take. So I feel like even though that is the simplest of them, it's actually the most complicated of them and opens up everything else that I wrote.
Yeah. So if you had to illustrate it, like if you had to pick a monster to illustrate that thesis, what kind of comes to mind?
Yes, that one's really hard. So because I started with, I think lots of monsters would come to mind, but because I started with Beowulf, I will say Grendel, where in the long history of rewriting Grendel, or even in criticism around that monster who strides into a hall, smashes things to pieces, cannibalizes people, rips them up, he is a monster of terror, but even in the original Old English poem, he's a monster we understand. He's been excluded from the community. He's the one who, the very song that takes place at the beginning there about the creation, is the one that damns him to an eternity of hell. He's the perennial outsider. So, of course, he's really angry and he's going to destroy that community. And then in the long history of rewriting who he is, there's the oscillation between a deep sympathy and a deep terror. So I always think of John Gardner's deeply philosophical version of Grendel, who just kind of wants to scream at the universe for all the misunderstanding and his inability to communicate to others what he wants.
I know, I think it's thesis 2 where the monster always escapes. And looking at the different reiterations of, say, Grendel, do we have any like modern monsters, whether it's in literature or film, that you see, it's obviously not about Grendel, but that sort of same, outsider, screaming at the universe. Any contemporary examples you can think of that sort of fit that Grendel vibe?
I mean, there are lots of monsters that fit that Grendel vibe. I mean, now that I do have the internet and I have streaming services, I've been watching Rings of Power. It's really fascinating to me the ways in which they redid Sauron to be a figure of immense evil, but not as flat as he was in Tolkien's original mythology, where there is a complicatedness to him. He's a really intriguing character who creates things and has this alternate version of the universe. Or in the Game of Thrones prequel, the ways in which it's hard to say what's good, what's evil, and even the centrality of dragons in it. Dragons can be, as they are in Beowulf, figures of immense destruction, but also of power, desire, triumph, you name it. And what I love is that it's not easy to tell a clean tale about where the monster is going to stand on that, fear, desire spectrum. It can oscillate even within the same story and oscillate over time. There's no easy way to say how it's going to go.
Yeah. So as you were answering, it kind of triggered something that we've debated in my class before. I'm curious to hear your take on it. Can we label human beings monsters or not? So a big, somewhat controversial film that's come out on Netflix that has even true crime people sort of raising their eyebrows is the Jeffrey Dahmer series on Netflix, which has made a lot of people uncomfortable for a variety of reasons. Do you feel like it's appropriate to label human beings monsters, or is it better to say they do monstrous things? I've read a few different essays, and as a class, we've debated that, whether that's okay or not. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, I think the way you put it was a really good way to put it, meaning that it's not like something we throw around that term monster as if it could contain the thing that we emplace within it, when in fact, there is a kind of acting that is monstrous, a performativity that is monstrous. Michael Shemer's work on monstrosity in performance, I think, gets at that. It's not really like it's a zero state or an inner core. It's what you do. Now, I will never watch the Dahmer streaming thing. The older I get, the more scared I get, and I have trouble. And yet I get it. I also believe that if it were, say, based on Jeffrey Dahmer, but the guy's name is like, Joe Dinger, and then it'd be like, oh wow, that's so fascinating. Yeah, based on, so it's okay. That is, it's the monster coming too close. And I think the fact that humans actually do these terrible things to each other, and we don't have the category monster to protect us from it and say, that's not me. And Jeffrey Dahmer really did those things that are being depicted in that movie. He really did kill and eat people, and he really did conduct some of his activities with impunity because he tended to prey on young men of color who, when one tried to escape, the police brought him back. I mean, it is an indictment not just of his monstrousness, but the monstrousness of the society around him that allowed some of that to happen.
Yeah, no, there's a saying. So I pastored for 16 years, and there's sort of a saying that goes around, and it's not meant to be, it could be taken very condescendingly or judgingly, but, when you hear a story like this, there's sort of a phrase there, but the grace of God, except for the grace of God, go I, kind of a thing. And it's just, like you said, the monster's too close. In other words, like the right conditions, the right lack of support, the right abuse, fill in the blank. And it's very scary. I don't like the fact that there are human beings who could do these things.
I think it's too close, Seth, but I think you're exactly right. I often think about last year I went to see an expert on genocide, Father Desbois, came and speak here at my home university for Genocide Awareness Week. And Father Desbois has done research into what he's done is document actual cases of genocide, and he's done it around the world. He's a known expert on it. But, and he's obviously a man of deep faith in religion. But for him, the difference between a person who commits genocide and a person who doesn't is opportunity. And he says that this is a sad fact after long study, that there's something in human nature that draws us toward the terrible, and many of us can't stop ourselves when given opportunity. And he would rather have us acknowledge that is always going to be a possibility as a first step to trying to stop it from happening again and again and again.
Yeah. Wow. And so, by the way, anything that you mention, scholars, their works, we can make sure to put those in the show notes as well, so people who are listening can go after those and do more research. So thank you for mentioning those resources. And
Sure.
The next question, it's a little bit similar to the third one, but where have you seen monster theory applied that sort of surprised you or shocked you? Just a unique application.
It's funny. Because I'm on Google Scholar, I get an alert when somebody uses some of my work every now and then. And and monster theory is the work that I get the most of these Google alerts over. And just even in the past couple of weeks, there was a piece from an Australian journal that applied it to academics who do scholarship of teaching and learning in Australia as monsters. I'm just like, wow, scholars as monsters because they teach something outside the norm, but not really anything that's scary it was about disciplinary anxiety caused by their identity. I'm like, okay. There was an article called "Why Are Plants Horrifying?" It's like, I didn't think they were, but
Yeah.
I'd like to learn more about that one. What's going on there? And then another one I saw recently about coal as being a material that's innately monstrous because it crosses categories, it binds on the body, it doesn't stay put. I'm like, wow, that's a really interesting way to think about it. So the imaginative traction that people get off thinking things as monsters really just amazes me.
I saw one, blanking on the title. It basically looked at volunteers in organizations. So it wasn't nonprofits, but it was organizations that had volunteer workers that people don't donate their time, and they were monsters. They're not employees. And people really weren't sure what to do with them. They were sort of a category of worker that didn't really fit, what certain organizations expected. And yeah, it seems like anything that crosses boundaries or breaks categories or jams categories, seems to be ripe for monster theory analysis.
And it's true. And then you get at the fact, too, that not all monsters are scary, right? We have our adorable ones, or monsters and Monsters Inc. And, it can be an affectionate category. So, yeah, there's lots of traction you can get from thinking with it.
Yeah, I grew up with Sesame Street, and so monsters teach our children. I mean, one of my students did her final presentation on Cookie Monster, and it was hilarious because we looked at some of the old footage from, I don't know what it was, the 50s maybe, and it was I can't remember. It wasn't a cookie monster, but it was like some like cheesy wheel, like a wheel muncher or something like that.
It all started when I discovered wheels. These wheel-shaped cheese-flavored snacks that taste so... cheese-flavored. Anyhow, I was fixing a tray of wheels when suddenly I saw a wheel stealer.
I am a wheel stealer. Ha, ha, ha.
And he ate up all my wheels.
And it was this really strange and kind of creepy. It was a much more aggressive, not quite as polished looking Cookie Monster, but walked us through the history of it, and it was fascinating. Just sort of a friendly monster icon that we have that we don't think about too much except for cookies, and then there's this whole history and character development that, yeah, it was really super interesting. Or
Am I remembering this wrongly, or did Cookie Monster eventually start eating vegetables?
Oh, hi, Cookie Monster.
Hey there, Cookie Monster.
Hear the rumors?
What rumors?
Never mind, got any cookie?
No, sorry, just a birdseed.
Yeah, and I have cabbage and spaghetti here.
Oh boy, cabbage! Wow, that looked good! Me never had cabbage.
It's all full of vitamins. Hey, you want to try some?
Sure, why not? Take me mind off cookies. Nom, 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 nom. Oh, delicious! Oh, cabbage.
This is Mario Lopez for Extra Sesame Street right here, right now. Veggie Monster is eating another vegetable.
Whoa, hold on a second. Me not eating vegetable, me eating cabbage.
Cookie Monster,
Hey, whoa.
cabbage is a vegetable. Yeah.
No!
Oh, yeah, it's a vegetable, all right.
I'm not sure, and it's possible somebody told me, and that's apocryphal, but I love the idea of it.
yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, with all the limiting of sugar and concern for health, that would fit. So where have you not seen monster theory applied that you feel be worthwhile? So if you've got somebody listening here who, whether it's a personal project or something for school, and they're like, there's so many things I could do, where have you always maybe wanted to see it applied, or do you see an area like no one's really taken it over here yet?
Where I'd be interested in seeing a little bit more would be in studies of environment, climate change, and that sort of important thought horizon at the moment. And I know there's been some work there, absolutely. But I would be hungry to read more of that kind of work, honestly.
So moving to sort of the intersection of monsters and religion. So I teach this course, and it's listed as both religion and communication. And I've got a theology and a comm background, so I kind of work with interdisciplinary spaces a lot. Where do you see, or how do you see monster theory becoming a dialogue partner or a better dialogue partner with religion or sacred texts?
I will say I think it's always been in dialogue with especially religious studies, because it is fundamentally a question of what people believe, how they come to believe it, and how it fits into their systems of thinking and feeling. And I do think a religious studies approach to it opens up that whole range from affect to cognition, which, one of the ways we often go wrong as scholars is to only look at the cognitive portion of things, and not to examine what's held in the heart, or what is part of a cultural inheritance as part of a religious tradition or background. And so many of the monsters that we have, even in pop culture, ultimately have arrived from religious backgrounds. You name the religion, and there's a rich repertoire of monsters that are part of its mythology, its traditions, its storytelling, its sacred texts, you name it. So I think that's there. And I think the other intersection, of course, is anthropology, where a lot of work has been done on monsters' belief and religious belief.
Yeah. So what words of caution would you have? I know it's always tricky when you're handling whether it's the Bible or the Quran or any other sacred text, and you want to explore, maybe it's the book of Revelation where you do have dragons and beasts out of the sea, or you've got jinns, and you don't want to do anything that's disrespectful, to a religious belief system, but you still want to analyze, the monstrous. Any words of wisdom for how to go about that without unnecessarily, causing offense or harm?
I would say do it with sympathy and do it with a sincere attempt to understand what's actually going on in the text and those who wrote it, and also how it lives as a living document or living belief system, because it isn't ever going to be the same. That what was generated, say, in a sacred text from 1,000 years ago is exactly the same as how whatever story has lived throughout the centuries. Another way of putting this is, I recently finished a book on Noah's Ark, and one of the things always smuggled aboard the Ark are various kinds of monsters that they don't want to lose in the flood. But the beliefs around them and the stories told about them have changed over time, even if, the Bible gives us one version of what things could be. Human imagination throughout the classical period, the medieval period, the early modern period, all the way up to the contemporary, has been a reinvention upon reinvention of what's possible within that story. What can you load into the ark? And I think it's true of every monster. It's going to change over time. And to see these not as errors, but as expression of the human imagination, of human curiosity, and the human desire to understand how the world works, possibly in more capacious terms. I think, that generosity will get you a lot more traction than, say, coming in with an attitude of belittling or disbelief or rising above. I'm just not really sure what you gain from that.
I used to hate it when my father would tell bedtime stories and then just stop right in the middle and tell me that I'd have to wait to hear the rest of the tale until the following night. I do the same thing to my kids now when I tell them stories, and unfortunately, I'm going to do it to you too. There is more to hear from Dr. Cohen, but you'll have to tune in next time to Beast and Bible. In the meantime, it's good to reflect on the call to approach the monsters in sacred texts, particularly those outside of your belief system, with sympathy and a willingness to understand, instead of seeking for an opportunity to condemn, which often distorts what the text says. It reminds me of John 7:24, where Jesus tells us not to judge by mere appearances, but to make a right judgment. It's easy to have a knee-jerk reaction to something without taking a closer look at it to see what's actually going on. I hope to see you next time for Interview with a Scholar Part 2, right here on Beast and Bible. Hosted, written, and produced by Dr. Seth Pierce. Edited by Heather Moore. Logo design and social media by Chelsea Ernina. Tech and equipment support by Steve Husett and James Gigante. Project support by Heather Moore.